Well, hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Jeremy Leffler, and I work in the Policy Office at the National Science Foundation. And it's my pleasure to welcome you today to another session at the Fall 2022 NSF Virtual Grants Conference. Before we get started, we're going to take a poll to find out a little bit more about you. And if you're using Zoom from a desktop browser, you might not be able to access this poll, so you want to make sure you're viewing this presentation from within the Zoom applications. Today, if you have questions for our presenters, we ask that you submit them using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Please keep in mind that we have a lot of individuals in attendance for this session, so we may not be able to answer all of your questions. We are recording this session and it will be made available on our website, nsfpolicyoutreach.com, in the coming weeks. And we'll send an email announcement to everyone as soon as all of the sessions have been posted. If you experience any technical difficulties during this presentation, please let us know in the Q&A and we'll get somebody to help you out. So thanks for participating in our poll. I'm now pleased to present this session, which will cover award management, everything you need to know about managing your NSF awards. This session will be presented by Beatriz Azor, Jannele Gosey, and Jeff Vieceli.
Thank you, Jeremy. Welcome to the Fall 2022 Grants Conference, NSF Grants Conference. Along with me here, we have two great people from the BFA office, and they will be, along with me, presenting this award management session. I'm a grant and contracts specialist analyst in the Division of Institutional Award Support. Jannele?
Hi, I'm Jannele Gosey, Team Lead and Senior Grants Officer in the Division of Grants and Agreements.
Hi, I'm Jeff Vieceli. I am the head of the Systems Office in the Division of Institution and Award Support.
We will give much information as we can during this session, but you are always free to contact us by email, phone, Teams, two-way pager, Morse code, or however you need to communicate to get the job done. Listed here is today's agenda, which I will give a brief overview of the NSF award process, which is how the funding is obligated. Next, I will discuss some of the most common award processing delays. We will then go over post-award notifications and requests. Following that, Jeff will discuss reporting requirements, no-cost extensions, and award transfers. And Jeff will then turn it over to our colleague, our sister division, the Division of Institution and Award Support, Diaz, who will discuss how to perform award oversight and discuss unallowable and allowable costs. Lastly, we'll wrap up with your keys to success. And this is our slogan: ask early, ask often, which has always been proven to aid in the successful administration of awards. We don't keep a tally of how many times you may call or email us with questions. Believe me, it never hurts to ask. It's always the assumptions that gets us in trouble. So without further ado, get your pens and pencils out. It's time to take some notes, ladies and gentlemen. The Division of Grants and Agreements is a customer service-oriented office, and our mission is to support the issuance of NSF Assistance Awards and other agreements by providing business, financial, and award administration from pre-award through closeout. Our sister directorate, Diaz, which stands for the Division of Institute and Award Support, they provide sustained excellence and stewardship across the grants lifecycle through state-of-the-art business practices and exemplary business assistance to key stakeholders within NSF and across the research community. Here's a visual of the award process. Well, after you submit your proposal, it is reviewed by program. If the award is not recommended, the program office will disperse a declination letter. If the program reviews and recommends the proposal, it's sent to my office, DGA, for review. These are the different directorates, abbreviated, and the grant specialist that facilitates that specific division within that directorate will review and make the decision to award or decline. Okay, do not be dismayed or discouraged if your proposal, once it's gotten to this point, once it's gotten a DGA, is declined. Your institution can be declined for various reasons, with the most common being that after DGA or Diaz pre-award financial and administrative review of your institution's policies and procedures, or the accounting system and financial statements, et cetera, other requested documentation, we may find that your institution isn't financially viable, or your accounting system isn't capable at that time of managing the federal funding. So we may decline the award for those reasons. But please do not get discouraged. This is the perfect opportunity for your institution to strengthen its policies and procedures or rectify any issues so that your institution will be able to receive future federal funding. Now, if the decision to award is made, the funds will be obligated by the grants officer and an award letter will be emailed to the addressees on file. Congratulations, you've been awarded an NSF grant. What kind of awards are issued by DGA? Assistance awards. The principal purpose is to transfer anything of value from NSF to the grantee for them to carry out a public purpose. Now, if we were acquiring property or services for NSF's direct benefit, that is what will be considered a contract. So the type of assistance awards are grants. Grant can either be standard or continuing. A standard grant is one where when the award is made, you'll receive the total budget amount at award. Continuing means you'll receive your funding in increments. And we also disperse or award cooperative agreements and fellowships. How many award actions does DGA process each year? DGA typically approves 12,000 new awards, 5,000 supplements or continuing grant increments, and 5,000 non-funded actions. Next slide. Okay, however, there may be a few reasons that can delay the processing of your award. Listed here are a few of the items, with the first one being overdue project reports, which from a PI or a co-PI on that award or an associated award. My colleague Jeff will discuss this further in the next slide. Also, not following the solicitation requirements can delay award processing. So please, once you receive that award letter, if you're an SRO, please set up a meeting with your PIs and co-PIs, finance team, budget, whoever is involved in this award, and go over the award letter. Revisit the solicitation because it may have been a while since you last went over the requirements. And also look at the research terms and conditions, because once you draw down the first dollar, that has told NSF that you've accepted the terms and conditions of the award. So please work with the SROs and PIs and co-PIs, anyone involved, to reintroduce yourself to the solicitation as well as the research terms and conditions. Okay. Also, please note that the IRB, which is the Institutional Review Board, and Institutional Animal Care and Use Committee, IACUC, if you have human subjects or vertebrate animals included in your proposal, you must submit the IRB paperwork or the IACUC paperwork in advance before you can receive funding, okay? It must be submitted before the proposal can receive the funding, okay? Also, unallowable or unjustified budget items. My colleague, she's going to go into that a little further when she does her portion of this presentation. However, I just want to put out there this one blurb. I'm not sure if she's going to touch on it, but one thing that I do see a lot of in the budget justifications that come through, I see a lot of raffles, lotteries, competitions. I don't see gambling as much, but just know all of those that I've just listed are not allowed using federal funding. For example, if you have human subjects that are responding to surveys, I've seen where they say, okay, the first 5 respondents, we'll give them $100 gift card and anyone after will get 50. And gift cards are fine, they're fine, but they must be in the same amount for everyone. So that's like a competition, you understand? So no competitions, no raffles, lotteries, or gambling. Also, if you are giving out gift cards as incentives, it's perfectly fine. However, your institution must have policies and procedures in place for disbursement and tracking purposes. Okay, next slide. Jeff?
Thanks, Jannele. Now we're going to talk a little bit about overdue project reports, one of my favorite topics. Not really. The main takeaway here for overdue project reports is don't let it happen. And the reason I'm saying that is because it's actually very penal in terms of what happens with that award or any other subject awards. Jannele mentioned it briefly on one of the other slides. We do have this associated reports. So if an award has an overdue project report and the PI or co-PI are on other awards, we sort of have this spider web effect where it will block those other awards as well. So we block the approvals on the subject award as well as any associated awards in terms of funding actions and no fund actions. So say you want to change the PI and there's an overdue project report. We won't allow that change to take place until you somehow or another address or tell us how you're going to address that overdue project report. Same thing with funding actions. If there's an overdue project or an overdue project report, we will not allow funding to be added to the subject award or any other associated awards. So it really is something that you don't want to happen. If it does happen, you want to contact us as soon as possible when it is occurring. I will note a few other things. The co-PI may be blocked as well as the PIs. So again, it really is that combination of PI and co-PIs and whether or not they're on other awards and how they're associated. And let's talk a little bit about the report requirements. APRs and FPRs require PO review as well as approval. So it's not just the submission of the report, it is the approval of the report that we're counting. The APRs are due at least 90 days prior to the end date of the budget period. And again, I'll repeat that, it's at least 90 days prior to. So NSF does send out reminder notices, but when we send those reminder notices, it is at 90 days before the end of that budget period. So if you really read the policy, when we send out that 90-day reminder notice, you're basically already overdue. It's just that we're giving you that 90-day grace period to get it submitted. It is not that the report doesn't become due until the end of the budget period. It's just that, again, we're trying to help and we're trying to give you that reminder notice so that you don't become overdue. The final project reports are due within 120 days of the end date of the award. Let's go ahead to the next page, please. The project outcomes report for the general public is due very similarly to the final project report. It is 120 days after the end date of the award. The POR is not approved. We publish it verbatim. So that, again, it is whatever the PI or co-PI who are ever submitting that POR, whatever they submit, we publish word for word. NSF does not really review it. NSF does not edit it. So again, if there are any issues with that, we do have a process for that. But again, NSF is publishing those verbatim. I will say that we do send out, as I mentioned, notices. We send those out to the PI, the co-PIs, and the SRO so that we're notifying everyone. We also CC the program officer internally at the NSF, at least on the first overdue notice. Research.gov has a reporting dashboard where the SRO as well as the PI and co-PIs can go out and see all of their project reporting requirements, so that none of this should be should come as any sort of a surprise to anyone. You can always see your awards that you are assigned to and what those reporting requirements are. The PIs and co-PIs have equal ability to submit the project reports. The Sponsored Research Office, the SRO, does not have the ability to submit a report. The best practice would be for the SRO to track and follow up with the PI or co-PIs on their project and to make sure that those project reports are submitted in a timely fashion. Again, we don't want those project reports becoming overdue. And again, as I mentioned before, if there is an issue, you should reach out to the program officer, the PO, as soon as you identify that there is some sort of an issue. Let's go ahead to the next slide, please. This slide is just pointing out and pulling out the language from the PAP guide that basically includes language about the submission of the final project report, as well as the the project outcomes report, the FPR and the POR. By submitting those reports, NSF is taking that the PI and co-PIs have completed the scope of the project. That means that they've done everything that they said that they were going to do, either in the original proposal or any approved changes of scope. So if you are looking to get a no-cost extension, if you're looking to do a PI transfer, if you're looking to get a supplement, you should hold off on supplying and submitting those final reports. Because again, NSF is saying, if you submit those, you're telling us that the project has been completed. If the project's been completed, you shouldn't need a no-cost extension, a PI transfer, a supplement, or any other sort of action. So when those reports are submitted, NSF basically closes the award administratively. And to reverse the submission of those reports takes a lot of administrative actions and will require you all to provide various pieces of information as to why the reports were submitted if the project had not completed its scope. I will mention that the submission of the reports does not affect any drawdown of funds. So again, the SRO has access to those funds for the 120 days after the end date of the award before NSF automatically financially closes the award. So the submission of the final project report and the submission of the POR, again, that does not affect the drawdown of funds. Let's go ahead to the next slide, please. As a reinforcement to that policy that is in the PAP guide, NSF has implemented for the final project report and the POR, these headers, these banners, which basically are repeating that policy. Submission of these reports indicates that you've completed this project, you've completed the scope, that there's nothing further you need to do. Again, if you're a PI or a co-PI, you should not be submitting these reports if you've not completed the project. I guess I should also mention that the final project report, the FPR, is actually, there's a lot of confusion about what it is. It is actually the final annual report, and I believe the next version of the PAP guide that will be released is clarifying that by specifically stating that it is the final annual report. It is not a cumulative report. Let's go ahead to the next slide, please. Okay, FAPIS, which is the Federal Awardee Performance Integrity and Information System. FAPIS is a fairly new requirement that OMB put on all federal agencies via the uniform guidance. FAPIS basically says that within 1 year of the end date of an award, if the project reports, basically any of the annual reports, final report, or that project outcomes report, that POR, have not been submitted to the NSF, NSF must report the awardee organization to FAPIS for material noncompliance with the terms and conditions of their federal grant. So this is not something to be taken lightly. NSF has recently started reviewing awards that are bumping up against the deadline in terms of what should be submitted to FAPUS. So we have started reviewing those awards and started to look at those. So again, this is another thing that awardee organizations, PIs and co-PIs do not want overdue project reports. Reach out to the NSF as soon as you realize that there is an issue. Don't wait until the last minute. Because again, if we report your award to FAPUS, FAPUS is a publicly facing website that's available to the general public, as well as other federal agencies. And it is listed as a material non-compliance with the terms and conditions of the federal grant. NSF, like all other federal agencies, are also required to check FAPUS before they make new awards. So if you have 20 awards that have been reported to FAPUS for overdue project reports, that could affect you getting any new awards. So again, you want to make sure those project reports are submitted. You do not want to be reported to FAPUS. Okay, moving on to the technical reporting requirements. So as I mentioned, NSF does not want you to be overdue on project reports. We want to provide as much assistance as we can, because we do not want to report anybody to FAPUS. We do not want overdue project reports because of the negative impacts. So NSF has put together a working group that has come up with several things that we are implementing to help awardees and to help the NSF. So we're looking at the verbiage that is included in the award notices to make sure that it's clear and understandable by the awardees. We've issued additional guidance to let people know what they need to do and the importance of those project reports. So again, you should take advantage of the information that's out there. You really should read those notices as well as the PAP guide and make sure that you understand the reporting requirements for all of your awards. Let's go ahead to the next slide, please. And I will turn this one back over to Jannele.
Thank you, Jeff. DGA reviews the proposal to ensure budgetary and administrative conditions are in accordance with the solicitation. As I spoke on this earlier, before an award can be made, all projects involving human subjects must either have an IRB approval or exemption. Same goes with vertebrate animals. Before an award can be made, all projects involving vertebrate animals must have an IACUC approval. What about awards lacking definite plans for use of human subjects? Okay, there is also a certification that you can receive from the IRB that states that your project lacks definite plans for use of human subjects. However, once you get awarded, you cannot work with human subjects. It's still not an approval for you to move forward with working with human subjects. You cannot work with human subjects until we receive a certification from the IRB, which states that it's either approved or exempt. Next slide. Budget line F, participant support costs. Another definition of participant support. Be aware of NSF's policy with respect to participant support and watch out for unallowable entertainment and indirect costs. Budget line G, other direct costs. Subawards, G5. Please be sure that your subawards budgets and budget justifications are included as a part of the proposal budget. G6 other, this is a very gray area where, the costs may be allowable, but they must, any costs that are allocated to this G6 other category must be clearly justified, okay? Because that's kind of I don't want to say it's a one-stop shop, but it's where most people put costs that are unallowable. So it has to be highly justified and related to your project. Next slide. Indirect costs. You must use your institution's most current federally negotiated indirect cost rate agreement for your budget, as well as any subawards. If you or your subawards do not have a federally negotiated indirect cost rate agreement, then you all can use the de minimis rate, which is 10% and is calculated at the modified total direct cost base, okay? In most cases, if you receive supplemental funding on the award, you should use the rate, the indirect cost rate that was used at the time for the original award, or one of the rates that are on the negotiated rate agreement that was effective at the time of award. Budget justification. Your budget should be no more than 5 pages. Any amounts that are in a budget line item category, they must be documented and justified. And your amounts budgeted must be consistent with your organization's policies and procedures and cost accounting practices used in accumulating and reporting costs. Next slide. Okay, typical areas of questions that we receive a lot downstairs in DGA. Conference proposals and participant support costs. We get a lot of questions, or we have a lot of dialogue regarding costs that we see allocated within the conference proposals as well as in participant support costs. What's allowable, what's not allowable. Addition of subawards and subrecipient monitoring. If you need to add on a subaward, please make sure you have prior written approval from NSF before you enter into a subaward agreement, okay? You will submit this request through Fastlane or research.gov. You must have a DUNS number. They must have a DUNS number and be registered in Fastlane or research.gov. You also must have policies and procedures in place for how you're going to, from beginning to end, selection, risk assessment, monitoring, reporting. You have to have policies and procedures for your subaward activities, okay? Award closeout and mandatory cost share requirements. Most awards are automatically closed, but if there are special terms and conditions in the award that need requirements fulfilled, reports submitted, and then there'll be the manual closeout. Next slide. Okay, I'm sorry it's so tiny, but it's tiny for us as well. This is a copy of the NSF prior approval matrix for the research terms and conditions, and you can hardly see them here, but I promise you, once you print them out, or if you look at the actual prior approval maintenance, you'll see that they're broken down by different agencies. And this one here is NSF, and it tells you over here the subjects what you will need prior approval for, and this is for like post-award management. Next slide, please. Okay, one example, post-award request, and this is for long-term disengagement of the PI or co-PI. So in the event that a PI or co-PI is disengaged from the project for greater than 3 months, but intends to return, a request must be submitted by the AOR or the Sponsor Research Office in research.gov. The NSF program officer will provide written approval if it's satisfactory. You will not receive an informal amendment to the grant. However, failure to provide status of the absence could lead to termination of the award. You don't want that, okay? Next slide. Here's another example of post-award requests. So NSF gives you all total budget reallocation authority, with the exception of moving funding within or out of participant support costs, or if there's a change in scope or objective. Those 2 items require prior written approval from an NSF program officer. Once again, NSF provides you all total budget reallocation authority with the exception of moving funding out of the participant support cost category. You can put money into it, and just as long as it doesn't change the scope or objective, of course, but you'll also need prior written approval from the program officer if there's a change in scope or objective. So here, just like I just said, reallocation of funds for participant support costs, they must be you must have prior written approval from the NSF program officer. You will not receive a formal amendment letter from DGA because DGA does not approve it. Your program officer approves it, okay? But what we do approve is if you feel while you're doing your project, you need to provide incentives or give souvenirs, okay? So submit the request in research.gov. It'll be recommended by the program officer and approved by us, because these are generally unallowable costs. However, you may find that you may need this to carry out the objectives of your project. Okay. Next slide. Now I'm going to turn it over to Jeff.
Thanks again, Jannele. So we're going to talk about overdue project reports again. No, just kidding. We're going to talk about no-cost extensions, another topic that is near and dear to my heart. So let's just start with no-cost extensions. They are not for anything that has a zero balance. That is first and foremost. If there's a zero balance on the award, there is no longer a project as far as NSF is concerned. You've spent all of the money, so there's no further action that you can take if there's no money left on the project. So we do not even allow you to submit no-cost extensions if there is zero balance. And I will also mention that no-cost extensions are not about funds, but about scope. So I'll repeat that again. It's not about the funds, it's about the scope. You've not completed the scope of the award that you originally submitted as part of your proposal, or any approved changes of scope that you've submitted to the NSF. So a program officer contacts you and says you have $50,000 left on your award. You should do a no-cost extension. The answer to that is, well, I've completed the scope of the work that I said I was going to do, therefore I don't need that no-cost extension. Or you translate that into, oh yes, I didn't do this scope. I'm still crunching numbers, I'm still doing this, there's still a student that's being supported. Again, it is not about the funding, it's about the scope. There are deadlines to submit the no-cost extensions. These are all built in the research.gov. So if you go into research.gov and you submit your no-cost extension in time, it will be submitted as a grantee approved no-cost extension, as long as it is at least 10 days prior to the original end date of the award. If it's not within that, if it's more than 10 days or closer to the end date than 10 days, it will automatically flip and will become an NSF approved no-cost extension. This is automatically programmed in research.gov. And again, research.gov directs the user to the proper no-cost extension. I would also ask you to always verify that the date is correct that you're requesting for your no-cost extension before you submit it, as well as after you get that notice that it's either been accepted or approved. Because we do have cases where, for whatever reason, those no-cost extensions get submitted and they're only for 1 month. And you originally intended it to be for 12 months. So then you start spending, not realizing that the award expires in 1 month rather than in an additional 12 months. So just always verify what you're requesting and that it's been approved. We sometimes get, in fact, I just had a case where a PI submitted their no-cost extension request and it went to their SRO for approval and submission to the NSF, and it never actually got submitted to the NSF. So if you're a PI and you're creating those and you're requesting that no-cost extension, always follow up with your SRO to make sure that they've actually submitted it to the NSF. Let's go ahead to the next page, please. Canceling appropriations. So NSF funding is not good forever. So that's first and foremost. Congress has put limitations on the funding that we actually give to awardee organizations. Based upon appropriation law, that period of performance is generally 6 years from the date that we originally issue that award. So that means any awards that we made, new awards in fiscal year 22 using fiscal year 22 funds, will expire in cancel in fiscal year 28 at the end of September 30 of 2028. So NSF, generally, this is not a problem for most of NSF's awards, but there are some that, believe it or not, actually do not expend all of their funds within that 6-year period. So think of some of the larger standard grants that we might make. I know Jannele mentioned earlier that we make standard grants where we give you all of your funding up front. When we give you all of that funding up front and it's a large dollar award, it's possible that at the end of that 6-year period, you still have funding left that you've not spent. And again, this is only referring to specific appropriations. So if you had a supplement and it occurred later in like fiscal year 25, that would not be included in the fiscal year 22 funds canceling. Same thing with a continuing grant or cooperative agreement where you're getting incremental funding. Those funds would also not be canceling. It is just those original appropriations as they come within that 6-year period. And I say generally 6 years, but there are some other rules behind that. But you all don't have to worry about it from an awardee standpoint because a couple things happen. NSF controls this, and we will send out notifications to the SRO, to the financial folks, letting them know that you have funds on an award that will cancel at the end of a particular fiscal year. And again, I mentioned that September 30 date. That is the end of the NSF fiscal year. I will mention that NSF, because of our accounting system, generally closes down our accounting system prior to that September 30 deadline. So you would have to come in and do any sort of drawdowns for those canceling appropriations by that accounting system close date. And again, our Division of Financial Management, DFM, sends out many communications letting people know when that final day is for the fiscal year, because all of your drawdowns need to happen before that period. Okay, for this one, we are now moving into award transfers. The most important thing to remember about a PI transfer and an award transfer, NSF generally refers to it as a PI transfer, but it really is an award transfer. It's a mechanism to move an award from one organization to another, generally because the principal investigator, the PI, moves. I will take the opportunity to point out that NSF makes the awards to the organizations and not to the PI. So the organization actually gets to decide how they're going to handle those awards and those circumstances if the PI decides that they're going to move to another organization. NSF does not get involved. So if a PI contacts the awardee organization and says, oh yes, I'm moving to a new awardee organization and I'd like to take my award with me, and the awardee organization that they are working with currently says, no, we're going to keep the award and we're going to appoint a new PI, the old PI or the PI who's moving really can't contact the NSF and tell the program officer, yes, my organization won't let me take my award with me. Again, the awards are made to the organizations and not the individual PIs. As you can see here from this screen, there are several actions that can happen with an award. Again, the organization controls this, but they can actually submit and change the PI themselves and just keep the award. They can do a sub-award to the new organization and still keep the award, but do have the PI continue to work on it from their new organization, but handle that via a sub-award. They can agree to transfer the award, or they can actually agree to just end the award completely. If you do have questions about the PI transfer process, you should always reach out to the program officer and to your grants officer. There may be some other situations that they can also address and provide information on and provide guidance for, because we do have certain awards that actually are not allowed to be transferred. So, and I would address that as being a lot of our, some of the awards that we make to federal agencies, or people are moving from an awardee organization to a federal agency. NSF does not generally transfer to or from a federal agency to a non-federal agency. Let's go ahead to the next slide, please. A few things to remember about PI transfers. Career awards do not have any option to appoint a new PI or to do a subaward. So again, the choices are you either allow the award to be transferred or you end the award. I will also point out that the established program to stimulate competitive research, EPSCoR, funds are designated to a particular state. So if EPSCoR has provided funding to an award, those funds cannot transfer from that EPSCoR state to a non-EPSCoR state. And again, DGA can assist with this process in identifying what is EPSCoR or non-EPSCoR funds. And again, it is specifically if the EPSCoR program has provided funds, not just that the awardee organization is located within an EPSCoR state. It is specifically the EPSCoR funds. NSF is going to be moving that PI transfer functionality from Fastlane to research.gov. And at that time, we are hoping to put some edit checks to alert organizations that the award includes EPSCoR funds and that the new organization is not in an EPSCoR state, so that you're at least alerted to the situation prior to that submission to the NSF. Another thing that I would mention is always reconcile, if you are the original awardee organization, always reconcile the amount of the transfer. NSF does not get involved if there are any discrepancies whatsoever in terms of you transferred too much, you transferred too little. Some of the things that you might want to look for while you're doing that reconciliation, you want to look for if you've gotten all of the bills from any sub-awardee organizations. You want to look for and make sure that you've billed NSF for any equipment that's been ordered. You want to make sure that recent payroll has been drawn down, so that again, you're working with that final number whenever you start working on the transfer and what's going to move from organization A to organization B. And the other thing that I would say is start early on the PI transfers. These do take time. We, in fact, NSF just had a PI transfer where the PI moved over 1 year ago, and they just submitted the PI transfer to us. That really is probably too late, even though we went ahead and we actually processed it. Again, you should contact us prior to that. And next slide, please. Okay, at this point, I will pass it off to my colleague Beatriz, who will continue with the presentation from here.
Well, hello. I hope everyone is enjoying this session. And if you have not had enough fun yet, this is where it really begins. And I'm from the Division of Institutional Award Support, and our offices are the Policy Office, the Systems Office, where actually Jeff is the branch chief, and we have our two branches of oversight. We have the Cost Analysis and Pre-Award branch, and we have the Resolution and Advanced Monitoring branch. And as Jannele mentioned, our office not only provides oversight, but is also involved in the pre-award process at NSF. In this presentation, we realized that we will repeat some of the areas that you already have heard and that you have been told to read the policy and read our NSF policy. So without further ado, let's go into unallowable costs. Next slide, please. Unallowable cost. The definition of unallowable cost, actually, I like to summarize it and make it pretty simple for you guys. And it's really the costs that are not allowed to be charged on your federal award. And these are, you need to make sure that everything that you're requesting and the costs that you're incurring in your grant are allowable, allocable, and reasonable. And following the cost principles that you see in this slide, the uniform guidance, the FAR, and the PAPBG, which is NSF policy, and then FTR in cases that you follow the per diem rates and such. In this slide also, we talk about the delays of a budget proposal approval. So if we go to the next slide, these are a few reasons why your your grant could be delayed. And it's because we go into that proposal budget and we start looking at all the areas, and we say, if your proposal, we know that the requested salaries and wages seem very high or seem not to be very aligned with the time and persons months requested. So we will definitely contact you, or the grant specialist will contact you and will say, I need more information. I need you to provide your basis of estimate for this. And there you go, first delay. If we look at your indirect cost rate or your fringe rate, and we realize the calculation of the rate is not accurate, or the rate that you have applied is not the rate that you have negotiated already in your NICRA. Those are items that can delay definitely your grant. If we look at travel costs, this is something that I see all the time. Travel costs that are for like local travel, or there's not enough detail in your budget justification to tell us that you're following your internal policy or that you're following the federal per diem. You can do either one. In fact, if your policy is more restrictive, we take it. If your policy says that you will reimburse your employees or the people traveling, and then you have your parameters of when are you going to have your request a receipt and when not, and it's more restrictive than the federal government, is totally fine. Meals charged to awards for employees that are not on travel status, it's not that we are anti-food, it's just that, we cannot reimburse for any any employees' meals that are not on travel status, because that's considered like a working lunch, and we don't pay for working lunch. Participant support. Participant support, as Jannele said, and she emphasized quite a few times about participant support. Participant support is like NSS baby. Is our area of the budget that is very is just NSF. So we want to make sure that the costs that you're requesting in participant support are aligned with stipends, travel, subsistence, and other. Also, something that we see often is that people request for meals that are going to be provided by a caterer. It's really hard to tell if within that meal that you provided, from a caterer, it's really hard to tell if only participants are going to be part of that meal. So for those meals, we actually tell people to budget that on their G6 other, because it's not traceable to the participants. It's really hard to trace, who really was part of that meal. Next slide, please. When I mentioned earlier, there's some criteria affecting, the allowability of costs, and that's allowable, that's reasonable, that's allocable, and treated consistently. When I say allowable, then we go straight to the uniform guidance, straight to NSF policy. When we talk reasonableness, I always tell organizations to ask the questions to themselves. Is this something that my organization would pay with no doubts if we didn't have federal funding? If the answer is no, then there you go. Means that it might be unreasonable. That is something that definitely you're requesting and you're not thinking that is with federal funding, that you're just like, well, we'll just get it regardless, right? So we need to make sure that our costs, and then what you put in your budget request is reasonable. Allocable. You have to make sure you really need this for the award. If it's a piece of equipment that you might have somewhere else in your organization or in your institution, please verify that first, because everything that you should be requesting it needs to be allocable, necessary as well. Treated consistently. We want to make sure the organizations are treating their costs consistently, that everything that is treated indirect for a project is indirect on that project. Everything that is direct for a project is direct on that project. And what helps you with that is having policies and procedures in place that you will follow every time for every single award. Regardless of the type of award it is, you will follow your policy for consistency purposes. Next slide. Here are some examples of different things that come up almost on a daily basis and that people always have questions on, is like contributions and donations, goods and services for personal use. That's where the memorabilia and the totes and the t-shirts and the hats. Those are all that stuff comes in place. Membership costs. So these are costs that are unallowable, but of course, like Jannele mentioned before, there's some projects where we actually pay for that because we find it's relevant for the project. Some unallowable costs that are allowed in certain circumstances are also in this slide, and this is for you guys as a guide, like a quick reference guide for you guys to look at when you have questions about like conference costs, about participant support costs, public relations, advertising. Next slide, please. This is this is part of our post-award process. This is what we find in site visits, we find sometimes in audit resolutions. And this is where I feel like people usually benefit the most from our presentations. Sub-award agreements. Jannele mentioned before that it's very important that you request your sub-award approval from NSF. Why? Because when an auditor comes to your organization, the first thing they're going to ask you is if you have prior approval from NSF. Where is that paper that says that you were allowed to have this subrecipient, that you were approved through the system, not only because you asked your program officer and they emailed you back. You have to make sure that this is processed through NSF systems. Also, something else that we see in sub-awards is that some organizations just give a sub-award and they do not tell the subrecipient that they have to follow the same policy, the same regulations that they follow. For instance, they don't give them the NSF policy. They don't make sure they're following the uniform guidance. And when there's a question cost for your subrecipient, you are responsible for it because you're the prime. So make sure that your subrecipient understand that they're subject to the exact same rules that you are subject to. That's something really important, and we see it very often. Next slide. Participant support costs. And I know that you guys have heard participant support like 1,000 times in this presentation, but it's really important. And, and we see it all the time, how not only on the pre-award stage that we see that there's not enough budget justification for it, but we see that post-award, people put things in there that are associated with entertainment. And we understand. We understand you're bringing kids to training, that you're bringing school teachers, and you want to make sure that people are engaged and happy. But all that happiness is really great, but cannot be paid with federal award. It cannot be paid with federal dollars. So every time you're budgeting for participant support, or the after the fact that you are charging cost participant support, make sure that you read our policy and make sure that you ask those questions to yourself, like, is this really necessary? And is this something that the federal agency would have no trouble with approving? That's something that we always tell people, that make sure that you ask those questions yourself. Next slide. Meals and coffee breaks. No funds may be requested for meals or coffee breaks for intramural meetings of an organization or any component. So pretty much the answer NSF gives you is that there's only two ways we pay for meals. We pay for meals for participants because that's part of subsistence, and we pay for meals when someone is on travel status. And that is also subject to your policy or subject to per diem, which is whichever you decide to go. So in general, we only pay food under those two circumstances, and that's it. So every time you're thinking about meals and coffee breaks, go back and you remember, well, Beatriz said that they pay only under those two circumstances. So hopefully we've said it enough in this presentation and you will have no trouble with that. Next slide. Here is the links to the uniform guidance, the FAR, and the PAPPG. And I forgot to mention before, the uniform guidance release for the universities and non-for-profit organizations. If you are a for-profit organization, the federal acquisition regulations is what applies to you, and the PAPPG really applies to everyone. And the FTR, the federal travel regulations, they apply to those organizations that choose to use the federal per diem, for their awards. Also, there's some travel guidance there for, like, if you're flying, if you use coach or business class. So that's for you to have guidance, and you can also just use that as your basis of estimate when you're doing your proposal. But you can always have your own policies and procedures in place and just follow them consistently. And I will turn this over to Jannele.
Thank you, Beatriz. Looks like we're almost at the end of our presentation today. That time went by fast, but we still have some good information to recap for you. So I want to go over some keys to success. As I said earlier, you need to comply with all relevant federal regulations and national policy requirements. Be consistent, okay? You adhere to the terms and conditions of your award. As I said earlier, once you receive that award letter, have a meeting with the sponsor research officer and anyone involved at your institution to go over those research terms and conditions and any award specific requirements such as funding restrictions, special reporting requirements, or special terms and conditions. Okay, next slide. Make sure the award has an active PI. Okay, you can have one PI and up to 4 co-PIs. It can just be a PI by him or herself, but it has to have at least a PI in order for the award to remain active. If there's only a PI on the award and you don't have a replacement, then we'll have to terminate the award, okay? We want you to spend your money, your award money, prudently, yes, but we want you to achieve the goals that you set out to for your objective. So if you don't spend all of your funding, what happens? We have to send the money back to Treasury. Then Treasury looks and say, oh, well, NSF doesn't need as much funding as we gave them last year because they're giving us money back. So guess what? We're going to decrease their budget. No, please spend your money. Please spend your money, okay? But make sure that your funding is allowable cost, allocable, reasonably priced now. We don't want to get too crazy with the spending, and it is necessary, okay? Track your reporting requirements. Make sure your institution has established appropriate policies and written policies and procedures, oversight, and internal controls, okay? Next slide. Train your staff so that they understand their roles and responsibilities. Another thing to add on to that is if you know you have one employee who's responsible for one special thing, but nobody else knows how to do it but them, make sure they write that down, or you have someone shadow that person and learn those procedures, because that one little thing that they're doing could be the reason why you don't receive funding in the future if they were to leave your institution and that one little thing puts you out of compliance with federal regulation. So make sure at any time, everyone knows something about everyone's job, okay? Have some standard operating procedures, whatever it may take, but do not let one person hold on to one specific duty and no one else in the office knows how to do it. You need backups, okay? And once, like I said earlier, be consistent. Maintain timely and effective lines of communication. Meaning knowing who to contact for relevant information. So PIs, if it's programmatic, meaning if it's technical or scientific, contact your NSF program officer. If it's administrative, you start with your sponsored research office, okay? They're the middleman between you and I. So when you go to your sponsored research officer and they have further questions or can't answer your question, they need to contact us. Please, SROs, sponsored research officers, when you contact us, please have the award number ready, whether it's by email or phone. Just have that award number handy so we can look it up and we'll be able to help you right away with your inquiry. Now, I see there's a note down here that says NSF Policy Office. You can contact them with general grant policy questions. My advice, you will find 9 times out of 10, you will find the answer to your question in that NSF PAP guide. So start there first. If you can't find the answer in that PAP guide, come to DGA, reach out to the policy office. We're more than happy to help you. But I promise you, 9 times out of 10, and y'all can correct me if I'm wrong, you can find your answer in the PAP guide. Okay? Next slide. All right, I'm gonna turn it over to Jeff and I'll be right back to close us out.
NSF decided to add this slide to the presentation this year. And this is, again, the awardee responsibilities, the unique entity identifier, UEI. So what is the UEI? I'm hoping that this isn't something new to you all and that you're aware of what the UEI is. The UEI is a unique identifier that's assigned by GSA SAM.gov, and it was meant to replace the DUNS ID. All federal agencies are looking for people who are doing business with the federal agency to have this UEI. All entities, again, whether you're a prime awardee or whether you're a sub-awardee organization, you need to register, or prime awardees need to register and get a UEI, and sub-awardee organizations need to get a UEI. There are separate processes that are available. If you look at the SAM.gov webpage, it has the 2 separate processes for what each organization needs to do. So again, if you are just going to be a sub-awardee organization, all you need is the UEI. There's a process to do that, but you must have that UEI. Prime awardees, to get that award, you need to register and go through an entity validation and again, get that UEI. Okay, so the main takeaway from this slide is to start this process early. As some of you may be aware, if you go out to the SAM.gov website, they have experienced a delay. They have experienced a backlog. The federal government transferred to using UEI in April of 2022. And other people are now requiring people to get a UEI, even though they're not federal agencies. So GSA, SAM.gov was not actually ready for the volume that they've experienced. So they are getting many, many, many more requests for UEIs than what they ever expected. So there had been a backlog. They've now basically cleared most of that backlog, but there's still a delay in processing. And again, the idea is start renewing and revalidating, because you have to revalidate. If you're a prime awardee, you have to reevaluate or revalidate every year annually. So when you go out to start that process, again, start early. If you don't have a UEI to begin with, start early. So if your deadline is September 30th, don't go out there on September 28th thinking that you're going to get a UEI and a SAM registration, that you'll be able to meet that deadline. I would suggest at least a month in advance, if not more, especially depending on what you're doing. I will say that if you are a new registrant, the process takes longer. And if you are revalidating or renewing your registration, the process will take longer if you've changed any of the information on your registration, such as your address or your name. Those things will slow down the entity validation. So again, start the process early. And again, if you're a prime awardee and you're submitting the proposal, or you're the sub-awardee organization that will be on a prime's award, you must have those UEIs prior to the submission of the proposal. So again, don't wait till the last minute. I would suggest at least a month, if not more, especially if you're a new organization or you have changes to your to your registration. So again, this is just that public service announcement. And with that, I will pass it back to Jannele.
Thank you, Jeff. Next slide. Okay, so before I give you more information, I want to speak from my heart. So, as I said earlier, the most important thing in this awards process is having effective communication between everyone. That's the most important part of this process. So I like at the end of presentations and seminars, I like to speak on what I consider the 3 C's for success. There used to be 4, but I think I dropped one of them for a reason. But early in the presentation, you've heard us speak about written policies and procedures over and over again. And I also said that there may come a time if you've never received an NSF award, or if you never applied for one and you become declined, and part of it may be because you don't have strong enough policies and procedures. This is from inexperience, okay? So what I'm saying to you, first C, copy. No, not plagiarize, but copy. Go out and look on the internet. Look at the policies and procedures that are out there that are in place by top 100 institutions, and look at those and, kind of use that as a template for what you are doing at your institution. And, that can help to make yours stronger, okay? We already said conversation or communication. So you want to speak with everyone about everything all the time. Ask early, ask often, right? Another C, collaborate. We all know that we are stronger together. So I'm encouraging the PIs, and SROs encourage your PIs to build those working relationships with other smaller institutions or community colleges for additional opportunities. They may have never had an NSF award, but guess what? They can be a sub-award on your award. So, we're all stronger together. So, collaborate to, build those working relationships. And the last C is care. I love what you do. The world appreciates what you do. You're in your position for a reason. So please continue to share your knowledge. Please continue to propose to the various NSF solicitations. We appreciate you all and all of your efforts. And we're just so happy to have had this opportunity to speak with you all today. And I hope that everyone remains safe and that we'll be able to engage face-to-face soon. So let me go to this last slide. So this last slide here, it basically giving you where you can go to get more information. So if you need more information about drawing down, how to draw down, where to draw down, you want to reach out to our Division of Financial Management. The name of the system is ACMS. Okay, you want to follow research.gov and Fastlane for directions and edits. Being prepared, read the error message that you receive in research.gov or Fastlane and make screenshots of them. And what you want to do is use those screenshots in your emails to the help desk or the program officer, so that will help explain, so they can see exactly what the issue may be, and they'll be able to help you probably right on the spot. Okay, so remember to submit your sub-recipient information to FSRS, which is the Federal Sub-Award Reporting System, okay? Listed also are the help desk numbers and contact information for research.gov, as well as Fastlane, Policy Office website, DGA's website. So with that being said, once again, thank you all so much for your time. So now we're gonna move right on to the Q&A session, and we'll see you on the other side. Thanks, y'all.
Okay, I'd like to welcome my colleagues back to the Q&A session, and I do want to give a huge shout out to my colleagues for really going to town on answering all those questions. A number of us behind the scenes answering questions. It looks like we've answered over 100 of them. So great job, guys. And what I'd like to do is pose some questions that we felt would be good for the larger group to hear. We answered a lot of them, but before we do that, I just want to make a couple of comments about questions, because a lot of the questions that were being asked in this session are very easily answered by doing one of a couple of things. You can go directly to the NSF Proposal and Award Policies and Procedures Guide, and I put a link to that in the chat for everyone, so you can open the chat and scroll to that and get that. And then we also have a frequently asked questions document related to the PAP guide, where a lot of these questions are addressed. The second thing I wanted to mention about questions, and some of this was reflected in the questions that came in, is where do you go at NSF when you do have a question? And obviously, this session is about award management. So if you have an award, if you have a question about a specific award, the first thing you want to do is go to the grants officer that issues that award notice. However, it may be that your question is going to be something that should be addressed by the cognizant program officer for that award, if it's a program-related question. The other thing I would recommend is that if you have general policy questions, you can send those to policy@nsf.gov, and we will do our best to either answer that question or point you in the direction to somebody who can answer it. So policy@nsf.gov is also a resource. I saw a couple of questions asking about, we mentioned Fastlane, we mentioned research.gov in this presentation, and question was, isn't Fastlane gone? Not yet. It's almost gone. You have until January 30th to prepare and submit proposals using Fastlane. In many cases, you will be required to use research.gov regardless. But Fastlane is still around for a number of items, including there are, I believe, still a couple of notifications and requests that are in Fastlane, including PI transfers. Those are slated to be moved into research.gov in 2023. So those are still in Fastlane, a couple of those. And then there are post-award actions, a number of post-award actions that Fastlane will still be available until September of 2023 to be able to do some post-award actions, that those notifications and requests that I just mentioned for proposals that were submitted originally in Fastlane. So I just wanted to clear that up before we dive into some of these other questions. We've got a few minutes, and I've tried to group some of these questions, and some of them we may have answered in the Q&A, but I thought some of them might be good just to have a little further discussion about. And we spent a bit of time on project reports. So I want to start with project reports. And the first question being, what is the difference between due and overdue, those deadlines for project reports, and how is that reflected in the system? So Jeff, maybe you want to start off with that one.
Okay, I can answer that one. I do want to take one quick second just to mention that all of the notifications and requests, you would actually log into research.gov. And for any of the ones that are still in Fastlane, it kind of redirects you over to the Fastlane functionality. So you're going into research.gov, but you're still sort of kind of using Fastlane. So you're not logging into Fastlane, but research.gov for those. So now in terms of the project reports, so let's first of all talk about annual project reports. If you read the policy in the PAP guide, annual progress reports are due at least 90 days prior to the end of the budget period. Okay. So there were some questions in the chat about, okay, well, if I'm submitting the project report 90 days early, what am I doing? So you're like, well, anything that you're not reporting upon in that report, you would pick up in the next report that you submit. NSF starts sending out reminder notices at 90 days. Technically, if you're an auditor and you're looking at that, you're going to say, well, they didn't submit it prior to 90 days before the end date of that budget period, therefore they're overdue. Well, NSF does not consider it overdue. It's still due. It's just in what we're calling that 90-day sort of grace period. The annual project reports become overdue the day after the end of the budget period. So in most cases, again, if your award ends September 30th of 2025, that budget period ends on September 30th of every fiscal year prior to 2025. So you need to submit those project reports at least prior to that September 30 deadline. On October 1st, they would become overdue. And they remain overdue again until they are approved. It's not the submission, it's the approval. Final project reports and the project outcomes reports for the general public, they are on a slightly different schedule than the APRs. They become due the day after the end date of the award. So again, in my example, if the award ends September 30th, on October 1st, that FPR or POR are now due. And you have, in most cases, there are some exceptions for SBIR awardees in particular, but in most cases, awardees have 120 days to submit that project report. That is when it is due. After that 120-day period, it then becomes overdue. So again, it's slightly different for the APRs than the FPRs and the PORs, but we do send out reminder notices. If you've not submitted the project report, you will get those reminder notices that clearly indicate it's due, it's overdue. And again, research.gov has a reporting dashboard that includes all of these report requirements. So if you're a PI or a co-PI, you can see every award that you're associated with. And if you're the AOR or at the SPO, SRO, and you have the proper authorities, you can see all of the or all of the reporting requirements for all of the awards for the organization. So again, that information is out there.
Let's stick with project reports a bit, because you talked about this spider web of concerns with if you have overdue reports and how it affects other co-PIs on the award. Once an overdue report has been submitted, is there anything lingering that identifies either the institution or the PI of having had late reports? So is it kind of like a black mark against them going forward?
The history is maintained, but it's not really, I wouldn't say that it's really viewed and used as a black mark. At the moment, the only black mark would be if we are reporting you to, again, FAPIS, and we've not really started that. We are, at the moment, we are just looking at the first class, so to speak, of what might be reported to FAPIS. But there's really not what I would call a black mark. The history does remain, and you can certainly, as a program officer, as a grants officer, you can certainly go out and look to see that they submitted reports late. But again, there's nothing, they submitted 5 reports late, so we're going to do this. There's no policy behind it, but the information is available.
Okay, and then a final question on project reports. So say a PI or a co-PI has left the institution has exhausted its efforts to get that PI to submit the report. What should they do if they are not successful?
As I typed in one of the answers and I mentioned, always reach out to the program officer. The program officer would be your first stop for the progress reports, and reach out to them as soon as you know that there's an issue. And they will work it through the NSF. We do have steps that we can take in those circumstances. And then that case, we actually do set flags on a PI or co-PI record to basically say that, yes, they did leave and we had to do something. So those are considered black marks, but just overdue reports in general are not. So again, reach out to the program officer as soon as you realize there's an issue.
Okay, great. So the next question is going to be really directed towards Jannele to Beatriz, and this is about the budget and what can be included in a budget, and especially in the participant support cost category. And the question is, can you include things like T-shirts, gift cards, those types of costs in participant support?
Yes, you can if they're needed to carry out the objectives of the award. However, they must highly justify in great detail of why they need those items in the budget justification. Beatriz, did you want to add anything to that?
No, yes, so definitely the key word here is they're necessary. They're not just because you want them to, look nice. It's something that needs to be necessary to identify the kids in, I don't know, in a conference. There's been cases where we have seen that we will have them participating in some large, gathering, and they want to make sure that they can trace them, and they will wear bright orange. So those are, but it has to be very specific, and it has to be justified in your budget and definitely looked at by a program officer.
Okay, let's stick with participant support. And this was one I saw that was answered in the Q&A, but I just wanted to just make sure everybody kind of got the issue here on moving items in and out of participant support. Can you clarify when you can, if you can, and what are the steps for doing either of those types of actions, moving in or out of participant support?
Okay, you can move funding into participant support without prior written approval from NSF. Moving funding out, you have to have prior written approval from your NSF program officer. The key word here is prior and written. So you'll go into research.gov and there is an electronic request. I believe it's called, and Jeff, you can correct me if I'm wrong, I believe it's reallocation of participant support costs. And once that's completed by the institution, it's then funneled to the NSF program officer where he or she will make that determination. You will not receive a formal amendment from NSF, but you should receive some type of email from the system giving that authority. Is that correct, Jeff? Okay. So also, if you need to move funding from one of the other categories, say category subsistence and participant support to F4 participant support other, you will need to have prior written approval for that also, because other is one of those gray areas and we want to just make sure you're not sticking money in there to use it for unallowable costs later. Did you want to add anything, Beatriz?
Yes, the rationale behind moving the request to move monies out of participant support is that there might be a change in scope there. You might be saying that you were going to have 500 participants and now you have suddenly 200 only. So your program officer wants to know why and how is that, how will that impact your project? That's the rationale behind it.
Great. So the next question, we had a number of questions about NSF's policy on 2 months of salary, and I want to make sure that everybody understands the policy and you can go again to the PAP guide and look at the faculty salary policy. The entire section, I would recommend that you do that. But so NSF does have a policy of generally only supporting no more than 2 months of faculty salary across all NSF awards. However, you do have the ability, one, to request more, and if it's approved by NSF in the award, then you have approval to do that. And then second, you have the rebudgeting authority to increase beyond 2 months post-award, as long as this does not change the objective or scope of the work. So I wanted to bring up this issue and then ask if you all have anything, if Jannele or Beatriz would like to comment any more on the 2 month issue from your perspectives.
I'm good. You summed it up for me.
Yes, same here. The 2 month rule is really a budgetary, it's just for budget purposes. It's not for, after.
Okay, we also had a number of questions about the allowability of costs of meals at a conference or workshop. And I know that a lot of those questions were answered in the Q&A, but Beatriz, I wanted to give you an opportunity to talk about the allowability of costs of those types of costs.
So conference, if you are going to provide meals as part of the conference, yes, we have conference awards, in fact. So we can pay for those. We pay for participant support, through subsistence. If you have kids that are going to be in your school for 3 days and you're going to provide lunches, we pay for that. We pay for meals when you are on travel status. We pay you to go, somewhere for a conference, and you will get whatever the policy of the university or organization is, which I think I mentioned that it could be your own policy, a reimbursement policy, or you could follow the federal per diem rates, whatever you choose. And we take, if your policy is more strict, NSF will accept that. So those are the 3 cases. I think I mentioned the 3 cases where meals would be provided. There's other cases where meals can be approved, but that needs to be justified in the budget. It needs to be agreed upon, during your grant approval with DGA, with your program officer. There's cases where, it's absolutely necessary, and that's the word here, absolutely necessary and reasonable. And in those cases probably would be covered.
Okay, well, I think we have time for one more question, and that is asking about the difference, and I know you touched on this in the presentation, but the difference between grantee approved no-cost extensions and NSF approved no-cost extensions. Perhaps you can just kind of define what those are and how those work from an awardee perspective.
I can answer this one. Grantee approved no-cost extensions, if you look at the PAP guide, are just that. They are extensions that the NSF has allowed the grantee to take on their own without any approval or real review by the NSF. You can do up to 12 months in most cases, as long as that request is submitted in research.gov within 10 days of the original end date of the award. So again, research.gov is programmed. If you come in on the 11th day, it's going to let you go through with that grantee approved no cost extension. If you come in the 9th day before the end date, it's going to flip it and it's going to create an NSF approved no cost extension. So again, that grantee approved no cost extension is, we give you as the organization up to 12 months on your own authority, your own approval to extend the award.
Jeff, I like to call that the freebie.
That's right. That is you can take that. And again, if you miss that 10-day window, you can then create and submit the NSF approved no cost extension. Again, that is generally for up to 12 months at request. So you couldn't come in and request a 24-month no-cost extension, because again, the idea is we want you to come in. It's fine if the NSF grants you 24 months worth of no-cost extensions. We just would not do that all up front, because we would want to know more about where the project stands, why you need a no-cost extension, and 24 months is just a long time for you not to be in communication with the NSF. So again, they're generally limited to 12 months. They are just what it says. They come into the NSF reviews them and approves them. The first one can be approved by the program officer in most cases, and a second one or any subsequent ones come in and must be approved by a grants officer. So that is basically the difference between the grantee approved and the NSF approved no cost extensions.
Thank you. And I want to thank all of the panelists today and everybody behind the scenes for doing such a great job for this session. I want to thank you for joining us for this presentation. We're going to put a link to a survey in the chat, and we'd really appreciate it if you can give us feedback on this session. If you want to view the recording of this session, you'll find it and the presentation on the Policy Outreach website. And we do have 2 more sessions this afternoon at 1 o'clock Eastern time today for a session presentation by the NSF Office of the Inspector General, and then at 3 p.m. Eastern time for a session covering the Major Research Instrumentation Program, or the MRI program. So we hope you see you for some of those sessions and tomorrow as well, and we hope you have a wonderful day. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.